Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today is a very special episode of Splat from the Past because I am interviewing the most underrated exploitation director of all time, James Polakof. He directed such classics as Sunburst, Swim Team, the Love in the Midnight Auto Supply, Satan's Mistress, Balboa, and the timeless classic that everyone should see, The Vals. He is my second interview from The Vals. As you know, I had Michelle Larita on last month, and I'm having him on the show today to talk about the making of that movie and just, why he got out of directing and how he became a doctor and all that stuff. And I can't wait. I'm just really excited. He's a very underrated director, as I said, and you should check out his movies. So, here is my interview with James Polakof.
Good evening.
Hey, James. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Fine. Thank you for rearranging the time.
Oh, my pleasure, sir. The honor was all mine.
Good.
But this is overall a wonderful honor, and I thank you so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure.
So, going back in time, did you gravitate towards film early on?
Well, my early on career, when I was, goes back to when I was just out of college, I basically developed and opened my own advertising agency, and we did television commercials, and I did quite a few of the commercials myself on camera. So, and that's where I began doing some directing and writing of commercials. That's how it all started. And then I started doing some industrial type films and then some documentaries. Way back when Phyllis Diller was still alive, I did a documentary with her. You probably don't remember well before your time, but
I do.
An actor by the name of Eddie Albert.
Yep.
Who and I did a documentary with him. And then one thing led to the other. I got filmmaking into my blood, and I also learned how to raise money for motion pictures, and that's really what got me started. Is I got together with a group who was involved with investors, and we made our first movie with Will Gear, who was the Grandpa Walton on the Waltons, if you recall that.
Right. Yes.
And that was an interesting story in itself, because at the time we were in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where our company was headquartered, and Will was on the set of the Waltons, 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So when he got off the set of the Waltons on Friday afternoon, he'd go to the Burbank airport, hop a plane. I'd pick him up at the San Jose airport, and then we would head up to the mountains, which weren't too terribly far away, the Santa Cruz Mountains. And there we shot the movie Silence, and I shot him on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, took him back to the airport Sunday night where he could be on the Waltons the Monday morning, and then I shot around him for the rest of the week, and that's how I made my first movie.
Wow. And because you made commercials, did you make low-budget films because you kind of saw the bullshit and the bureaucracy of Hollywood mainstream?
Well, one of the main reasons I had no connections. At that time, it was an entirely new business, and so I had to kind of feel my way through, and particularly since we were in San Francisco,
mm-hmm.
I didn't know Francis Ford Coppola, who was probably 5 blocks away from where we were headquartered. And later on, of course, I got to know the whole operation. But we were the only, George Lucas, Francis Coppola, myself, just about the same time. We were really basically the only filmmakers in the San Francisco Bay Area. Saul Zaentz, who was across the Bay Bridge in Berkeley, that was about it. So, this was a relatively new business, and everybody was looking for money, including Coppola.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it all worked out. But of course, once I got the first one under the belt, I had made contacts with agents, and from that point on, it became a little easier because then I had connections in the Hollywood area. Even though most of the first 4 movies, actually the first 6 movies that I made were all made in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Wow. Yeah, and that was before Coppola had Zoetrope, right?
No, that's when Coppola opened Zoetrope.
Oh, okay. So
he opened that. I mean, they all went to USC together. Coppola, Lucas, there was the whole crowd. But George Lucas happened to be, I was raised on a farm outside of Modesto, California, and that's where George Lucas grew up. Mm-hmm. And he was a couple of years younger, but we're actually the same age bracket. We used to race cars at that time, and George would come out and watch us race at night. So, whole story that goes way back when, and that's when he made. I was writing the script when I saw that he was coming out with American Graffiti. We both making the script based on the same Modesto, California background.
Wow, so you saw that whole world that he was depicting on screen then?
I knew it as well as he did. I mean, we were both part of it. We grew up with that, whole situation, and it was all based on Modesto, California. He actually shot a movie in San Rafael because it was easier for where he was located at the time, but it was all based on Modesto and our early days in Modesto.
Nice. Do you remember the first movie you ever saw?
Friendly Persuasion.
Oh, was that Gary Cooper?
Gary Cooper.
Yeah. Anthony Perkins. Yeah, I think.
Yes, that was the first one I can remember. I was a kid, but yeah, that was the first one.
Mm-hmm. Peter Mark Richmond. That's a good movie.
Still is today. I mean, it's still, people are still watching it today, so it's,
Yeah.
It has a lot of relevance today, actually, based on the Quaker background and the whole peace movement they had at the time, so.
Yeah. Do you have a list of favorite movies?
Well, I love movies. I see just about everything, but, some of the movies that I think are classics, the direction was so outstanding. One of my favorite directors was David Lean, and of course, Dr. Zhivago, I think, was one of the finest movies ever made. So when I think of pictures like that, they don't make them that way anymore, unfortunately. I mean, the time and the craft and the number of takes that David Lean would do with an actor, was just fantastic. And of course, one of the better movies made, The Godfather with Coppola. He was able to, everything was so precise that he was able to match the license plate frames that they had in those areas, not just the license plate, but the frames that went around them. I mean, he was very detail-oriented.
Absolutely. Was there any filmmakers that influenced you?
I think that one of the filmmakers that influenced me was Peter Bogdanovich.
Oh, yeah.
And he made a movie, you may recall, called The Last Picture Show.
Yes. Great movie.
And in that movie, you may recall, and it was the first time I'd ever seen it done, and I did it in my third movie, but he actually inspired me to do it. It was a phenomenal dolly move in which there were no cuts whatsoever, and the scene lasted about 6 minutes, and the dolly, there was, actually almost 10 minutes, and the dolly would move, along with the actors. And that was very impressive to me. So when I made a movie called Sunburst, which was, you remember Robert Englund, who played the Nightmare on Elm Street, he was Freddy.
Yes.
He was in, I probably had him in one of his first movies, so to speak. So he was one of my actors in that movie. But when I made that movie, I made a dolly move, and I decided I wanted it to go about 13 minutes. So anyway, but since then, if you ever watch the Academy Award, which I really think it should have won Best Picture, which was the 1917,
Mm-hmm.
just out this year. Look at the phenomenal dolly moves they made on that.
Okay.
Have you seen that movie?
Which one again?
The 1917.
Oh, 1917. No, I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, phenomenal. Well, when you see that, you'll see probably the greatest piece of filmmaking photography that's ever been done in a motion picture. That's why it was up for Best Picture.
Nice.
And you will see a dolly move in that was, I mean, there were very few cuts in the entire movie. Everything was done, following the two main characters with the camera. And if you watch it carefully, you will not be able to count any edits in the whole film. There's probably maybe 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I'll check it out. Yeah, I like history movies.
You want to see. I mean, filmmakers just rave about that. It's a fantastic film.
Yeah, I like history movies and stuff. Did you, before you started directing commercials, did you ever go PA on a movie?
No.
You went straight to directing and producing then?
Well, I was directing and writing and producing the commercials and the documentaries. So it was the next step up. I wrote the first screenplay, with the one with Will Geer, called Silence. I wrote the screenplay, and that was my story. So once I had the story, then actually there's a funny sequence about that. To begin with, I just was the writer and producer. The actual director was a director by the name of John Cordy. And John Cordy, of course, had won the Emmy for the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. And so I was fortunate because he was in the Bay Area. I was fortunate. John loved the script, and so he wanted to direct. And then there were reshoots to be done on Pittman at the time. And so I had to take over towards the very end and reshoot a number of scenes. So I had to actually step in to finish the directing.
Mm-hmm. And you worked with Will and Ellen Geer again on The Memory of Us. Did you become very close with them?
Did I what?
Did you become very close with them?
Oh, I knew them very well. I mean, I was in their homes and they were in my home. I mean, when you're making low-budget pictures, when I was on the Santa Cruz Mountains shooting the first movie, Silence, we slept in sleeping bags because everything was, an outdoor situation, and we didn't have enough money to really pay for hotels. So most of the crew and myself, etc., we actually slept in sleeping bags. But you get to know these people very well when you make low-budget pictures. In Memory of Us was the screenplay written by Ellen Geer, and I met her obviously through Will. So that got started that way.
Nice. Yeah, I reached out to Ellen a couple of years ago when I started the podcast. All she did was read my message. She never responded, unfortunately. But, oh well.
It's the way it goes, and, there's a lot of... there was a great deal of... the third movie that I made, which is called He Is My Brother.
Yes.
If you recall Bobby Sherman.
Yeah.
Who was the heartthrob. Originally, I had cast, and he had accepted the role, I cast Richard Dreyfuss for that picture.
Oh.
And the problem is that 3 days after I cast him for the picture, he called me on the phone and he said, Jim, I'm just so sorry, but I've got an offer and I've just got to take it because I'm working with Spielberg.
On Jaws.
That was Jaws.
Yeah.
So then I had to, quickly recast that particular lead, and because we were after investor money, I'd have to get somebody with a name value, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So that's where Bobby Sherman came in.
Wow. And I'm sure by that point, he didn't care about the money. I mean, his career was kind of in the toilet by then, right?
Bobby Sherman?
Yeah.
Oh, no. He was still a heartthrob. Oh, my God. He was still selling records and everything.
Oh, okay.
No. He wanted to do it because, and here's the whole point, the director that I hired, because I wrote the screenplay and I produced the movie and it raised, myself and my group raised the money for it. But we hired Eddie Dimitri to direct that movie. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah,
the Cane Mutiny and the Juggler and so many classics.
He had a whole slew of them, and he was a big name director. And the interesting story about that is that Eddie he had gone downhill because his last movies, the last one he did with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Bluebeard, total box office failure. The studios just weren't hiring him anymore. So we shot the movie in Hawaii, and I was able to make a deal by getting Eddie and his family to have a vacation in Hawaii and direct it at the same time. That was part of our deal, and then, of course, he had a percentage of the movie. And so, that's why Richard Dreyfuss originally really wanted to work with the movie, because, he wanted to work with Eddie. And, of course, Bobby Sherman took a huge cut in pay to be able to work with Eddie. I mean, people, he still had his reputation. The problem is, for one of the other major roles in the movie, I had cast Will Geer. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the Geer family and Eddie Dimitri, they wanted nothing to do whatsoever with him, because he was part of the Hollywood 10. You remember that story?
The Hollywood 10.
These are the people who were blacklisted.
Oh, yes, the McCarthy era.
The McCarthy era, they were blacklisted. Eddie Dimitri went to jail, and he couldn't, and Eddie told me personally, he said, I just couldn't stand being in jail. And so he gave names, and they never forgave him for that.
Wow, that's sad.
Quite a story. So Will would not do the movie simply because Eddie was involved with it. So it was, those are little behind-the-scene things about filmmaking that that a producer goes through, and then the long and the short of it is Eddie was on a short 3-week contract, and because of the rain that we had rained out a number of different days, Eddie says, my contract's up, that's it. So I have to finish the movie, and I have to finish directing it.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of like Elliot Kazan. He ratted on his own brother during that whole blacklist. It's sad.
Sorry, and Eddie was very sorry about it, but, I mean, there were a lot of people that were hurt when he gave up the names, but he told me person to person, he said that was just, I mean, I would not even be telling you this now, except that Eddie passed away a number of years ago. And, it's just the way it goes. It was a very, very sad situation, but I was a young kid, and I wanted to work with Eddie Dimitri. I learned a lot by watching him work, because Eddie would work in such a way, he got tired of studios recutting his films after he shot them. So he had a filmmaking process where he would move the camera in such a way that would prevent a studio from going in and recutting certain scenes.
And wasn't He Is My Brother one of the earliest Atlantic Releasing Corporation movies?
No, we released that. At that time, we were four-walling the movies. We would rent theaters. That's around the time that there's a phenomena that happened called Billy Jack that made a huge amount of money.
Tom McLaughlin, yeah.
Four-walling theaters. So when we raised money, we not only raised money to make the picture, but to also rent the theaters, so that we would, the theater owner would have the concessions, and we would have the theater, for a certain flat fee. Whatever we made, we made.
Yeah, that was what Rudy Ray Moore did with Dolomite. Same thing. So what was the genesis behind Sunburst?
The genesis. I'm just even trying to remember why I wrote that story, but it was a youth-oriented. I wanted to do a youth-oriented film. It was a youth-oriented film. In those days, I was pretty young too, so I felt at home with it, and it was an interesting story from the standpoint that you had a young couple who decided they just wanted to head to the mountains and find their friend, and who basically had become a hermit. That's Robert Englund, who he went to try to find. And the interesting thing about that movie, by the way, is if you remember, there's an actor who was a heartthrob years and years earlier by the name of Rudy Valley.
Yep.
And, here again, it helps to raise money when you have names that investors know, and most of your investors are, generally older in age, so to speak. So everybody, of course, knew Rudy Valley, and they couldn't believe that Rudy Valley was doing the movie. It was his very last movie that he did, where he passed away. But in any case, it was just a fun movie to do. And as far as the genesis, being understanding a little bit about the wilderness and that kind of thing, it was a natural story to write.
Yeah, it's a very bold premise, though. With the rape theme and stuff. I don't think you could do that today.
Let me tell you a story about that. The actress that we did that with, her name was Kathy Bauman.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy Bauman was Miss Ohio and a runner-up Miss America. In any case, her boyfriend was Hugh Hefner's best friend.
Huh.
So as a result, Kathy was at every party that Hugh Hefner had. I mean, it was just one big family.
Yeah.
And with all the connections, she kept trying to get studio roles. And the interesting thing about it is the fact that she wasn't a very good actress. And so, she just really didn't, aside for bit parts, she didn't get cast in very much, even though she was a beautiful young girl. I mean, Miss Ohio, runner-up Miss America, etc. But the interesting thing about it is that, Kathy, I felt at least she had something in her. And probably, I don't know, if a director has an achievement, you have to say one of the great achievements you could have as a director is to be able to get an actress who really is not known as a very good actress to act. And it was probably that scene, the rape scene, was probably one of the best performances that Kathy ever gave in her acting life. And as a result, I got a call from Universal 3 months after the film was released, and they called me in. Tom Mount, who was at that time casting for Universal, or he was the production head. Tom called me in, and he said, we have a movie that we'd like you to consider. And I said, and I flew up from San Francisco, and I said, I'm just curious, Tom, why did you pull me out of a hat or something to decide you wanted me to direct this? He said, I want to be honest with you. He said, you're the only director that's ever been able to get Kathy Bauman to act. And he said, we figured if you did that movie, you had to be good enough to do this one. And so that's a true story.
Yeah, Ann Lockhart was on the podcast back in January, and she told me that you were very charming and great to work with.
Annie was a delight. She was absolutely, not only was she a better actress than Kathy Bauman, but, she had a quality about her that was very real. Mm-hmm. And, the set itself was very lively because everyone got along well. And I think Annie was a big factor in that she was able to keep everybody, and she had this upbeat attitude, and we would work long days. We would work 12, 14, 15-hour days. Mm-hmm. And, you have to keep a certain amount of energy to do that. That's the problem with a low-budget film. I mean, I would work 12, 14 hours a day on most films, and then I would go and sit down with the editor to look at the dailies from the day before to make sure I didn't have to reshoot something. And so generally you're going on 2 or 3 hours sleep.
Yeah, it's really tough shooting independent films for all that time, especially, you have to do so many shots in one day because you're on such a low budget.
That's exactly it. And then you extend your days, and, Screen Actors Guild, a couple of different times I got slapped on the wrist for, working actors overtime and that kind of thing. But most of them went along with me. They'd work overtime and they wouldn't put down the time.
Mm-hmm. How was working with Peter Hooton?
Oh, yes. What did you do with Peter?
Oh, no, I said how was working with Peter Hooton?
How was working with Peter Hooton?
Yeah.
Oh, I really won't comment about that. That was not he was not an easy actor to work with.
Yeah, that's what Ann told me.
Because he was a stage actor, and sometimes stage actors don't really appreciate the nuances of film. And so that was part of the problem. There was nothing wrong. Everyone got along fine, but it was not one of my favorite experiences with actors.
Mm-hmm. How about James Keach?
Keach was fun. We got along great. He would, as a matter of fact, oftentimes I would rewrite portions of the film. I did that with screenplays. If I saw, the day before or the night before, I wanted to rewrite something, but Jim would sit down with me and, he would give me input, and that was really, very much appreciated. But he was fine. We got along great.
Mm-hmm. And Robert Englund, he's a great guy. I met him at a convention a couple of years ago, and my picture on my YouTube channel is me and him.
Oh, okay. Well, with Robert Englund, I mean, people don't realize, because of the role, I mean, his Freddy role, they don't realize that he's really a very sweet man.
Mm-hmm. He loves to give all the fans like 5 or 10 minutes of his time, and he's got long lines. I mean, everyone's waiting for a long time because he likes to talk to all the fans for a while.
I mean, he is very generous. He was very easy to work with. I would say that, I mean, people just would not understand what a sweet man he is, considering the roles that he's played.
Mm-hmm. And he's played a lot of villains too.
Yeah, exactly.
When the movie was released
he was the furthest thing from a villain in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. When the movie was released on VHS, it was called Slash Dreams. Why is that?
Because we ultimately sold some of our library. That happens with a number of different pictures, and the distributors, will, and they have the right to do it once they buy the rights to the movie. They have the right. I mean, we didn't sell all the rights. I always kept foreign rights, but I would, sell off U.S. rights if somebody wanted to take a film that was made a number of years ago and then re-release it, and they thought that would be a better title.
I see.
I had nothing to do with the title. I would have never named it that.
Yeah. And then you did Love and Midnight Auto Supply.
Yes.
That's like one of the earliest redneck car movies, right?
Well, it was. It was fun. I mean, it came from where, in the farm area where I grew up, one of the things that kids used to do is go out and steal hubcaps.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically that's how that term Midnight Auto Supply came about, is they would be stealing hubcaps and then, obviously selling them on the off market. And so, I was familiar with some of the young guys who did that, and that gave me the idea to writing that particular script.
Mm-hmm. You got to work with some great actors like Michael Parks.
Yeah, Michael was a difficult actor. Michael was someone who, in all fairness, who thought he was James Dean.
Yeah.
He wanted to be. He wanted to be James Dean, and the problem that we had is during the movie, Michael spoke so low that we had real sound problems trying to elevate his voice, just because he felt, he wanted to do that type of acting, introspective acting, as we might call it.
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, no, I mean there were some really fun people on there, old actors who people hadn't heard of anymore, but the investors knew. People like Rory Calhoun, who was with Marilyn Monroe in A River at No End or whatever.
River of No Return, yeah.
Was it? But I mean, there were some great actors. Originally, John Ireland, for example, who won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for All the King's Men. He was in the movie. So we do have some really fabulous people to work with. Linda Crystal was a fine actress. So there were people like that did quite well.
Rod Cameron in his last movie.
Rod Cameron, yeah.
And Colleen Camp, she's a brilliant actress.
Oh yeah, Colleen was a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, Colleen talked me into hiring her brother as a production manager, and so he did a fun thing. I mean, he was the one who got out and found all the cars that we could destroy. Because here again, you don't have a lot of money to destroy cars, and I needed the surplus of cars for cars going into the water and things of that nature. But it was a fun movie to do. Had a good time.
Nice. And then, how did you come up with Swim Team?
It was because I happened to see, the swim team era, how parents would act with kids and how they would become, it was like a Little League game. And I thought, well, there have been Little League movies, and why not a swim movie? So, and I was able to get Stephen Furst, who, of course, was one of the stars in Animal House.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just, that was a movie that was a very quick, I also had an acting school at the time because I had in the San Francisco Bay Area, I had 3 different acting schools that I would rotate, and I hired different acting coaches for it. In fact, Shirley Jones would come down and be a guest teacher from time to time. Marty Ingalls. I had a number of different Hollywood people who would come down and be an inspiration to the young people learning how to act. So I had an acting school in the Bay Area for several years, and this was a movie that allowed me to use a lot of actors in my acting classes that I didn't have to pay very much money for, because it was, here again, a kids movie, and it was, all around swimming, and as long as they could swim pretty well, I was able to use them.
Yeah, you had Stephen First and James Doughton, who both were in Animal House.
That's right. Yeah, James Doughton was too. Stephen was, the kind of the key person there, but absolutely, I mean, he was the funny person. The other one, though, that people don't recognize that I had in that movie, and it was his last movie. You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, Buster Crabbe.
Buster Crabbe, Flash Gordon, and all of the other wonderful things that he did. It's a very funny thing. If you have a moment, I'll tell you that story.
Go right ahead.
With these people are no longer around, so they don't mind me telling their stories. But as far as Buster was concerned, I went through an agent to try to get him, because obviously he was an Olympic champion swimmer. And I thought, who better to be one of the swimming coaches than Buster Crabbe, and pull him out of retirement, and he'd be a great name for investors. So I thought, Buster Crabbe, ideal. So I went to the agent, and they wanted a phenomenal amount of money. I said, you've got to be kidding. He hasn't worked in years. No, this is what he's going to get. So I said, and I had originally cast him, but then I found out that, the price had gone up, and I said, I'm sorry, we can't do it. So I just, Buster Crabbe. Now, Buster, of course, lived in the L.A. area. I was at that time still in the San Francisco area. So one day, my secretary buzzed me, and she said, there's someone out here to see you. And I said, who is it? She said, he says he's Buster Crabbe. And I said, what? And so apparently his daughter lived in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So I obviously invited him to my office. And he said, I really hate to barge in like this, he said, but I happen to be not too far away. And he said, I just have one question for you. And I said, what's that? He said, why didn't you cast me in the part? I thought it was such a great part. And I said, well, and I told him the story about, his agent. He said, the heck with the agent, the hell with the agent. He said, what do you want to pay me? I'll do it for whatever you pay me. And that's how Buster Crabbe got back into the movie.
Wow. Yeah, I interviewed the exploitation filmmaker Fred Olin Ray, who directed Buster Crabbe in his next to last movie, and he said that was his first time working with a name, a legend, and just he couldn't believe it, that he couldn't get through filming because he was working with Buster Crabbe,
Right.
It was amazing.
Oh, he had some amazing stories. I mean, it's always fun when you have the actors, and then, you go out to dinner at night or whatever, and you hear all the wonderful stories, and he had millions of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he did Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, and I think he was a Tarzan.
Tarzan. He was a Tarzan.
Yes. He did all those classic matinee serials back before there was episodic television.
Right, exactly.
And then you went full horror with Satan's Mistress.
It was called Dark Eyes.
It was called Dark Eyes originally.
Yeah. Again, a distributor picked that up, changed the name.
Mm-hmm. What made you decide you were going to do a horror film?
I hadn't done one.
Mm-hmm. You like horror?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are some that I enjoy, but I came across someone who told me a tale, of this woman who was seeing a spirit that came to her. This was the woman who supposedly claimed that this was happening to her. And so the long and the short of it is that this was supposedly a true story, but I thought, hey, this is fascinating, There's a real good horror film, where the spirit could be a good and a bad guy. Kabir Bedi, I cast in that role, who was terrific as the spirit, mm-hmm. and Lana Wood, Natalie Wood's sister, mm-hmm. Of course, did the was a starring role in that. But in any case, no, I hadn't done a horror picture, wanted to do one. Sounded like a great idea to me, so I wrote the screenplay. And the next thing is I was filming it.
Yeah, it took like 4 years to get released, right?
No, we released it right away. And it played theaters, and it actually enjoyed most of the success overseas before it really ever, got here. And then, of course, it went to the video here, which is where it's got most of its play through the distributor. That's when they took it. But, we opened it up, and it was a mediocre. I mean, Lana was really not a big name.
Mm-hmm.
It opened up. It was a mediocre box office film, but it did well overseas, and particularly with the Lana Wood and Natalie Wood tie-in. But Kabir Bedi was known in India. It did well in India. I mean, all of my pictures have played every country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Up until maybe 5 years ago, I was still getting revenues from foreign plays on the films.
Up until 5 years ago, what happened?
Well, they're no longer out there. Some of these films are so old.
Oh.
Somebody may have them, but they're certainly not letting me know about it.
The distribution.
Also, the foreign distributor that we had, this was Manson International. Actually, it's been more than 5 years since I received royalties from that. But Manson went out of business, and no relation to Charlie Manson, but Manson International was a very well-known distributor of foreign films. And so they handled most of my films. Whenever I had an open door with them, any film that I made, they wanted. So that was always a very nice relationship.
Mm-hmm.
When they went out of business and things started drying up, I would get sporadic, royalties, but not very much.
Yeah, and you got to work with John Carradine for the first time. That must have been great.
Absolutely, he was a treasure, absolute treasure.
Yeah,
an actor, but he was here again, wonderful stories. A very, very wonderful actor to work with. He did whatever you wanted him to do. And the last time I used him, he had become so frail that it was difficult for him to do much of anything when I did the Vals with him.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, he was, he was great to work with.
Yeah, I talked to one of his granddaughters. She's got a lot of great memories about him.
And his sons are still doing well. Madam Secretary, the president, you would never think that Keith Carradine would have ended up with that role, but that's a nice touch on the twilight of his career.
Yeah, and Robert, I've met him at a convention. Very nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you worked with Tony Curtis in Balboa.
Yes.
It says on IMDb that was originally a TV miniseries.
It was made with the idea. I wrote the story with the idea that it would go into a series, like a General Hospital or something of that nature. The way the world turns. That's how I envisioned it, as that type of thing. It was based on a kind of a true sect, you might say, in the Newport Beach area, where that's the way people lived. And because of, I was quite a tennis player, and I started playing tennis with some of them over at we had the Balboa Bay Club, it was known as, and it was based on the lives of these people. I mean, I watched them, and I said, my God, talk about, the way that people live, but it was based on Newport Beach, and I thought, what a great soap opera this could be. And again, Tony Curtis, his agent, loved the idea, because obviously Tony at that point was having problems in terms of drug habits and alcohol and things of that nature. So that's why I was able to get Tony at a relatively good price. But his agent also saw a future, if it were to go to a series, that could be, Tony's last hurrah. At least he would have a regular TV series.
Yeah.
The reason for that movie, and obviously we knew we would be able to to sell it foreign-wise for video. But that was made with that premise in mind, that it would go on to be a series. And, of course, right after that was over, Tony got checked into the Eisenhower facility, with his serious drug problem. And at that point, none of the networks wanted to have anything to do with Tony because of the problem. We never got that off the ground. I mean, it was a great premise. And, we had some good actors in there. My God, Carol Lindley, who was originally on Peyton Place, she saw it as a great series opportunity for her. Steve Canale, who was on Dallas. I had a number of people. Chuck Connors, of course, Sonny Bono.
Yeah.
It was quite a group of people.
Yeah. Was he at least good to work with?
Who was that, Tony?
Yeah.
Well, he's passed now, too, so I think that Tony was very difficult. Probably where he and I really had it out, with Tony, you have to be extremely strong, and I guess most directors, because of his reputation and his name, were intimidated by him. But one of my first problems was that he had a close-up scene to do with Carol Lindley, and so after we shot The Master, then we went in, and I shot Tony's close-ups. And after Tony's close-ups were over, because Tony did have this drug habit, and of course I told everyone to keep him away from drugs. And when you're working with a production crew, it's very easy for an actor to get a hold of drugs. But he didn't want to. After he was done with his close-ups, he said, he walked off, and I said, Tony, it's time for Carol's close-ups, Carol Lindley. And he said, no, she could do it. She's a professional. She could do it on her own. And he ran out the door. And I absolutely went through the roof. And Carol says, listen, just let him go. He's got this problem. Just let him go. I'll do the close-ups without him. And I said, no. I said, that's not going to happen. So I went to Tony and I laid my foot down. I said, you're not going to get paid. You're not going to work again. And you're going to get your butt out there. And I really read the riot act to him. Mm-hmm. He got right back out there. He did his close-ups with Carol. And we never had a problem after that. But, he was, it was a difficult time that Tony was going through with the drug problems at that. So, I mean, he was not himself. He was not the Tony Curtis of old, so to speak.
Yeah. I have a friend. She was a stand-in on a movie he did in the 70s, and he hit on her. He called her Spinner. And back then, she was very offended by it, but now she wears it like a badge of honor. She's like, Tony fucking Curtis can call me anything he wants.
Well, that's, and he was a character, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Real character. But I enjoyed my time with the other actors on that. We had a great time. We spent a lot of time together, and it was a fun movie to make.
Yeah, what was it like working with Elvira?
Oh, she was funny. She was really funny at the time, and again, she was really looking forward to being. She was not necessarily a great actress. She was, as you know, she was basically a TV hostess for horror movies.
She was a groundling, yeah.
And so she wasn't necessarily shall we say, a professional actress, but she did fine. And she really looked forward to it. The whole cast looked forward to doing this as a series. They really thought this was going to take off and this would be it. But of course, the key to it was Tony, and when that didn't gel, it went out the door. But anyway, she was fun to work with.
Yeah, and how did you get Martine Beswick to narrate?
Some of the scenes with Tony were not cutting together as well as I hoped they would, because the problem I didn't mention, and here again, it's when you have that drug habit, it's really difficult. He was strongly hooked. He could not do the same take with the same lines 2 times in a row. And so it became a real problem that I had to, find out how to cut around it. And with that in mind, I decided that it might be in keeping that I would have a narrator come in to bridge some of those gaps. So that's when I hired her to come in to do that particular narrative, and I thought it worked out fine. I would have preferred, it was not intended that the movie was going to have a narrative to it, but it ended up with the particularly Tony scenes, ended up allowing us to save the footage that was the best footage of Tony that we had.
Mm-hmm. Now comes my favorite movie of yours, The Vals.
Favorite? Okay.
What was the genesis behind that movie?
Well, Valley Girls was hot at the time. The song came out, and I had some investors in New York, and I said, I have an idea. I said that this song Valley Girl is going to take off, and we should do a movie. And we had just done Balboa, and they liked the whole feel of Balboa. The investors thought it was a pretty well-made movie, and so they said, fine, whatever you need, let's put it together. It sounds like a great idea. So it was right after that, the song came out, Valley Girl, and little did we know at the time that there was also another production going on called Valley Girl with Nicolas Cage. And we didn't know at the time we were shooting that they were shooting too. And so then it became a race as to which one would get out first. It was a race that we lost, unfortunately, because we started shooting later than they did. And they found out about ours, and Universal, I believe it was, released theirs immediately, which caused a problem then. Two of the same pictures, the distributor that we had in line said, we don't want to compete against Valley Girl. Of course, at that time, Nicolas Cage was unknown.
Yeah.
People knew him, but he didn't have, obviously, the reputation. That film really made him as an actor, at least gave him the exposure to go on to other things. And it was just a matter of timing. But we did it because of the song, and it was a good opportunity. And it, ultimately did fine. It actually did better overseas again.
Yeah. I remember being 12 years old, watching it on USA Up All Night. It was all cut up, and then I remember I rented it uncut around that same time. And one thing I was mind-boggled about at the time, and now that I'm older I can appreciate it, is that unlike a lot of those teen sex comedy movies that came out at that time, it doesn't have a whole lot of nudity or vulgarity.
Well, no, it didn't. I suppose it could have had more than what it was, but I don't regret that.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was necessary. The movie seemed to work okay without it.
Yeah, when I had Michelle Laredo.
Matter of fact, I'll tell you who wanted to distribute that film, but he wanted me to recut scenes and put more sex into it. And that was Roger Corman of New World.
Yep.
Roger wanted to distribute the movie. He thought it was a nice little movie. And he says, but you need more sex in it. I said, I'm not going to do it. I said, I like the movie the way it is, and I'm not going to. I said, with some of the actresses, I said, I don't think the sex thing is going to work, and I'm not going to push it. So, perhaps I passed up an opportunity there because he was willing to put a lot of distribution money behind it.
Wow.
But, that's okay. C'est la vie. Life goes on. But so Roger didn't get it, but we went out on our own. And as I say, everything ended up well. But I appreciate you enjoying the film.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's necessarily one of my best, but it was okay.
Yeah, Corman, he ended up making Screwballs and that Police Academy rip-off Recruits and all those movies later.
Right. And that's how they sold. And so, he saw the potential in this. He said, you just don't have enough sex in it. And that was his main comment. He says, just shoot a few scenes and I'll take it immediately. He said, what's it going to take you 2 days? Do 2 days worth of shooting, I'll pay for it, and, then we'll have it. And I said, it's not going to flow the way I want it to flow, and I'm just not going to do it. So that's what it was. Roger was kind of a fun guy. He says, well, let's do some other movies together. And I said, well, I don't think we're on the same track.
Oh. Michelle Laredo was on the podcast in January, and she told me she went to the audition, and there was thousands and thousands of girls auditioning for the movie. Do you remember if you saw any girls that ended up becoming successful later?
Well, Michelle was a lot of fun, and she's a good little actress. And it's a shame that, her career didn't do more than it did. She went on and got some parts and things. Also, the one that worked, I'm trying to remember, she played the part of Trish, I just don't recall.
I'll look it up here.
Her name, Jan. I'm trying to remember Jan's last name. She was a good little actress.
Oh, Elena Stratheros.
No, well, yeah, no, Elena, but no, I'm thinking the other one, the
Jill Carroll?
Jill Carroll.
Yeah.
And Jill was a good little actress. I mean, you know, Elena was okay. They were all right. But, you know, it was to be a fun movie, and it was. I mean, Sonny Bono, I brought him back into the movie again.
Yeah.
Sonny and I were good friends, and he says, sure, I'll come down and do the movie. Just, you know, tell me what you want me to do. And which is really funny, because when he ran for mayor of Palm Springs, thank God they never got a hold of the cocaine any cocaine segment, if you remember that at all.
And there was no internet back then.
Yeah, well, that would have killed Sonny's career right then and there for mayor of Palm Springs. But he ran as a conservative Republican.
Yeah.
But in any case, it was funny. But I mean, you know, Sonny would. I mean, we'd shoot a scene, and everybody when we wrapped for the day, Sonny would go out, the music would play, start dancing. Everybody started dancing. It was really a fun group of people. I mean, we had a good time.
Yeah, Michelle told me she was very close to the other three girls, and she wishes she knew what happened to them. I haven't been able to find them.
No, nothing much. Nothing much.
Yeah.
And it was, as I say, you know, these were not main actresses, and they were fine for what they did, for what the picture was.
Yeah. Yeah.
In budget, so to speak. But there wasn't really young actresses at that time. There weren't many around that had any name value per se. So for my private investors, I had to, you know, find other people that had name value.
Yeah. And she also told me, you know, you guys shot this in Stockton and not L.A., and I didn't even realize that. But then after watching the movie again recently, I was like, yeah, that doesn't look like Hollywood to me.
Well, you have to look at it carefully, because you wouldn't know the difference. Actually, the freeway shots, we did a lot of second unit work where we went, you know, to, you know, the 5 freeway and the 405, and we shot a lot of background stuff there to give it that LA feeling. But Stockton, the reason I chose Stockton, it was very much like the San Fernando Valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just live 2 hours away from Stockton, so I go to Comic-Cons out there.
Oh, okay.
And stuff. Yeah, it's a nice little area. It's very hot.
And it was a great place. The city welcomed the movie coming in. I had a lot of cooperation as far as locations. Locations didn't cost hardly anything at all. Made a deal with the hotels. I mean, we made a lot of deals to where, you know, a studio would spend a considerable amount of money that we didn't have to spend because of the way the city welcomed us and supported us, and what we were able to do in terms of locations.
Yeah. Do you remember what the budget was?
No, not offhand. I don't think I made a movie that ever cost more than $400,000.
Wow.
I was able to get a lot from out of our budgets. That's when we made Silence with Will Gear. As I say, we slept out in sleeping bags. We made that for $125,000.
Wow, that's crazy.
And we got that money back on our first theater.
Wow, that's crazy. How was working with Tony Longo?
Old Tony, well, he was a fun guy. He would come. He and I'm trying to think of the other fellow. They were the two goof-offs, as I would call them, and they would come to me every night with an idea of a new scene that they could do where they could do some fun stuff, you know, and he was very enthusiastic.
Yeah, that was sad when he passed away. He was in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
He's one of those recognizable faces.
Well, they gave him a lot of parts. I mean, you know, he fit the role for many, you know, shall we say, supporting actor type parts.
Yeah, I love that scene in the food court where they're doing the Julius Caesar thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Yeah, and that horse race on the beach, how did that come about?
A horse race on the beach?
Yeah, at the end of the movie, there's a horse race on the beach.
To the best of my knowledge, there's no horse race on the beach in that movie.
There is, I swear there is.
I don't remember it.
Yeah, Michelle told me it was pretty chaotic.
She remembers it. She told me it was very chaotic.
Horse race on the beach.
Yeah, they're like having a party. It's like a beach bonfire party or something like that.
We had a beach party, but there wasn't a horse race that I recall.
There was, but it's okay.
We didn't have any horses, so there couldn't have been a horse race.
There, I swear to God there was, but it's okay.
Look at the movie again. I think you'll be surprised.
Okay.
We had a beach party, of course, but there was we didn't have any horses, so I don't know how a horse race would have come about.
Okay. Did you guys have a rap party?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm. And you guys had a premiere?
Yes, we had a premiere. I'm trying to recall. I think we actually had the premiere in Stockton, the very first one, and then we had a premiere in L.A.
Were they good responses?
To the premiere?
Yeah.
I don't recall now, to be honest with you. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's okay. So, why was The Vals your last movie?
It wasn't my last movie. I actually had another movie that went to video, which was one of my favorite movies. But here again, I used a lot of students in it from my acting school, and it was called It's Only Make Believe.
Oh, okay. I see that here. I didn't know if it was released or not.
Oh, yeah. It was released, played overseas again, but it got a lot of video play here in the United States. It was made, primarily for the video market, and it was based on Legends in Concert in Las Vegas. In fact, one of my associate producers was, the one who put the Legends in Concert at the Imperial Palace Hotel in Las Vegas, put the whole thing together. But in any case, it was, the story of Elvis and Marilyn, where you have impersonators. And these impersonators, when I got to know them, I saw a real screenplay capability there, because these people really believed, in a sense, that they were Elvis and they were Marilyn Monroe and Buddy Holly. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, the fellow George Terlinger, terrific young actor, he's not young anymore, but he's still doing Buddy Holly, and he's still doing part of the Beatles and Ed Sullivan. So these guys are still doing their impersonations.
Mm-hmm. So why was that your last movie?
Why was that?
Mm-hmm.
I got tired of making movies, and there is a certain burnout period, and I got that under my belt, and I just decided that unless I really came up with something that I would feel would be a terrific movie, I didn't want to make lower budgeted movies anymore, and that's kind of that was my genre.
Yeah,
movies that you can make on low budgets that would get investors, in most cases, back their money, and that was when you're in that genre, you're never really doing the movie the way you want to. I never really had a budget to work with where I could do a movie and have weeks and weeks to shoot it, and I just I decided at that point that until I found a property that I would just not do it again, and ultimately as time passed by, I didn't.
You never got any offers from like George Lucas? Hey, you want to collaborate?
No, George Lucas didn't need to collaborate with me. Everyone wanted to collaborate with George. Not only that, obviously, his whole thing, even when he was younger, because his first movie was a science fiction movie, the first one he ever did,
THX.
Yeah. I mean, science fiction was not my thing. And so that's what George was really into. He did American Graffiti to make money.
Yeah.
Because we both thought it was a good idea. As I mentioned, I was writing this screenplay based on the same thing when he had completed his picture and started filming, and I realized that there wasn't room for two of those. But that's the only movie that George ever did that wasn't sci-fi.
Yeah. You worked with some A-list royalty though in these films. You were so lucky. I mean, I don't know if the money per se was good for them, but you kept them employed, and that's something to be proud of.
The money was never good for them. I have to say the only thing I could be proud of is the fact that when they read the script and when they read their parts, they really wanted to do the movies. There wasn't anyone that didn't want to do, that said, oh, I'll do it for the money, because there was never any money. I mean, all of these people worked. Every star that I've ever worked with probably 25% of what they would normally get as their fee.
Mm-hmm.
So it was never, oh, how much am I going to be paid? It was, I want to do the part.
Oh, that's good.
It took me time because I had to shop out, but fortunately I had agents I knew at William Morris and ICM, and they all knew me pretty well, and I was able to say, here's my script, here's who I'd like. If you can't get him, pass it around, see who you think might work with this. So the agents worked with me to get actors that really wanted to do the parts once they read the script.
Mm-hmm. Was there anybody you never got to work with that you really wanted to?
I wanted to work with Richard Dreyfuss. I was sad that but working with Bobby was a lot of fun, and we would be on set. The biggest problem were the sound problems, because when young girls would find out Bobby Sherman was around anywhere, even in Hawaii, they would be, in the peripheries, yelling and screaming, and I mean, he was still a teen idol at the time. So he was a lot of fun, and we had some, as I say, some sound problems because of the yelling and screaming in the distance. But basically, I would have liked to work with Richard Dreyfuss, and that's the only, I would say, looking back, I regret that. Also, the one who was going to do Midnight Auto instead of Michael Parks he became a good friend of mine, was Don Johnson.
Oh.
And the problem with Don is, the same time I was shooting, he got another movie that was paying him a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
He was at William Morris at the time, but he was, he actually came in with a fellow by the name of Terry Southern, who was a very well-known writer, I should say.
Yeah.
And with some ideas and things of that nature. I mean, Don really wanted to do the thing, so we became friends. He also wanted me to do another movie with him based on the country singer Jimmy Rogers, and we just never got that one off the ground. It never happened. But I had wanted to work with Don because I think he's a very good actor.
He is a very good actor. I think Miami Vice kind of boxed him in as a TV actor. TV actors are not that known for being that talented. But
right.
He's
when
very
he started out
talented.
with the movie A Boy and a Dog, that was an Academy Award type of
yeah.
performance. I mean,
great movie.
He in those days, he really had it.
Do you have a favorite movie that you made?
Favorite movie? I have parts of movies that I've really enjoyed. It's hard to pick a favorite movie because I enjoy just about all of them. I mean, from different perspectives.
They're like your children.
Pardon?
They're like your children. Your
well, in a
movies.
way, you look at different parts, you look back. It's difficult for me to. I mean, I really enjoy parts of Sunburst because, we really. It really gave me my first chance to direct and to do things I wanted to do. And I think that was probably one of my more enjoyable movies when I look back on it. And, I also, when I look back, there are things that I would have liked to have done better than what I did.
Mm-hmm.
My only regret is that I think I could have done some of these better if we would have had a bigger budget and we would have not been on release dates for most of these. You have to release them the year they're made for the tax shelter purposes, the year the money comes in. Some of those I would have liked to have just had more time.
Mm-hmm. But you did good with what you had, I have to say.
Well, that was about it. An old friend of mine, Irish friend of mine, used to say, do the best you can with the tools in your hands. So, and that's kind of what happened. I just think some of those could have been much, much better movies. Would we have had more money and more time? And that's what finally got me out of the business. Is I just didn't want to do movies where I didn't really have the full budget and the time to do it the way I'd really like to do it.
Yeah. So when did you become James Polakof, PhD?
Shortly thereafter, I was always into nutrition. So PhD is I'm a clinical nutritionist. I'm actually a certified nutritionist, even though I don't do it any longer. But I'm not really into that field as much. But I was doing wellness programs that I would set up for medical practices. I really enjoyed that. That was something that was extremely enjoyable for me, and my wife and we did that for quite a while. We enjoyed that quite a bit because she was a PhD as well.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a satisfaction out of doing that you didn't get from making movies?
Oh, it's a whole different world. I don't, the movie world's a whole different world. It's an exhausting world. It's the feast or famine world. You're up, you're down. Things are a hit. Things are doing well money wise. You're struggling. It was a very and again, I mean, the way that I would do, particularly on the budgets I had to shoot during the day. I never shot less than a 10-hour day, sometimes 12. And then I would have to spend 2 or 3 hours with the editor, going over the dailies and things of that nature, because you couldn't afford at that point to have to come back to location to reshoot. So you needed to know then and there if you had to reshoot. So, they were exhausting. And that's part of the reason that I, finally got to the point where it just took, too much out of you, and you just didn't have enough. Today, directors, are not on a pace like that. They weren't back then either, really. When Francis Coppola wanted to do a movie, he did as many retakes as he wanted to do. But he was Francis Coppola, and he had The Godfather, and he could do anything he wanted.
Yep.
And he was extravagant. He decided to, when he was shooting Apocalypse Now, I remember very well his office manager coming in and having lunch with us one day and saying, "You can't believe what Francis did today." And I said, "What did he do?" "He just bought a helicopter because he wants to get from one end of the island to the other." So, and that was, that was $1 million that out of the budget, so that he would have a helicopter to make it easier for him to get from one end of the island to the other. I never had that luxury. I wish I did. It would be fun.
Yeah. Now, you wrote a novel called The Fascinating Story of Erin O'Brien's Life, Afterlife and Reincarnation. Where'd you get the idea for that?
Because I studied, I did about 2 years worth of research on that book. I was always been fascinated by afterlife and by reincarnation, something that's always fascinated me. So I took a period of about 2 years of research to write that. I still have hopes. You mentioned that book, which is interesting. I still have hopes that could possibly be the basis of a miniseries that I'd like to do.
Oh.
That's the one thing that would bring me back into the fold.
That would be great. Oh, my God.
Well, it is. I'm in North Carolina now, and it's very difficult to, obviously, my connections are all gone. And, although, there are different ways to do things, but that's really what I would like to do, is I feel it's an ideal miniseries. So, and that's when I wrote the book, I thought about that. I kept that in mind. It's too big. It's a long book. I mean, I'm sure you haven't read it, but, it's a very long book, and it couldn't be done it couldn't be done as a movie. It has to be a miniseries.
Yeah, I'm going to eventually read it. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, if you could do it for like maybe Netflix, HBO, or Showtime, something like that.
Well, that's what I'd like to do. And if you ever get around to it, you will see if you go on Amazon.com, where the book is, where people buy the book, you will see the reviews. I've gotten some fantastic reviews for that book.
Wonderful.
About 90% of the reviews are 5 stars.
Wonderful. Are you going to write another one?
I might. I wrote a children's book that I haven't been able to get out yet because I haven't had the time to do it. But I have a children's book that I finished recently. But I might. I mean, very fascinated by the whole genre.
I've been talking to a lot of people lately who are writing children's books. It seems like it's a new fad coming back.
Well, I always wanted to write one. I always like to do things I've never done before. That's something I wanted to write. And I used to tell my children Brer Rabbit stories. So, this is kind of an offshoot of that. Actually, at one time, Disney was interested in buying some of my dear Brer Rabbit stories, if you can believe it.
Oh, really?
Way back, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you show a lot of versatility in your work and a lot of eclectic tastes, I've noticed.
I just try to enjoy life. be part of it.
Well, you have a very blessed life, James, and I thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure, and you've done a wonderful interview. I want to compliment you on the good questions.
Oh, thank you.
It's been fun doing the interview, and you shoot me an email when it's on so I can listen.
Oh, yeah, it'll be on probably later tonight. I'm going to fix it up, and I'll let you know.
That sounds great. Nice talking with you. It's been a pleasure.
You too, sir. Thank you for the nice compliment.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. James Polakof. Ain't he a cool dude? Wow. I mean, he is very articulate, and he's very eclectic, like I said, and very versatile. I like him a lot, and he still continues doing that in his work. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Oh, and before I go, I'd like to say happy birthday, Dad. My dad turned 63 today, and I love my dad dearly. Love you, Dad. Call you soon, and please pick up the phone. Later, dudes.